Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Our Universe Revealed. I'm Jonathan Crass, the coordinator for this public lecture series from the Department of Physics at the University of Notre Dame. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And as usual, if you want to find out more about the series, you can find that on our website at nduniverse.org or on Facebook or on YouTube. And we're going to be following the same format as usual for our online talk tonight, with a presentation followed by questions. You can submit questions at any time, either as we go along or at the end of the presentation. To submit questions, if you're watching in Zoom, you can do this using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. If you're in YouTube, you can use the chat window on the right-hand side of the screen, or on either platform, I'll send out a link to a Google form momentarily, and you can submit your questions there. Tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome Professor Clive Neal to Our Universe Revealed. Clive has been a member of the College of Engineering at Notre Dame for 30 years now, and he is a member of the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Earth Sciences. Make sure I have my teeth in for that one. He researches lunar science, in particular studying the formation of lunar rocks using samples from the Apollo missions. He's the principal investigator on a proposed mission to NASA to send 2 landers to the lunar surface to study the geological structure of the moon. And tonight, he's going to talk to us about some of the realities needed in getting humans permanently back to the surface of the moon. So welcome, Clive. Thank you for offering to speak to us this evening. And fingers crossed we can get your screen sharing working.
Okay, well, fingers crossed on that one. Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope to be doing this live in person again, but I think things conspired against that this time. However, it's, as I say, it's a pleasure to be part of this series, and I can always talk to you about the moon. So happy to do that, and talking about this Artemis versus Apollo, because we had Apollo, we celebrated last year during the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, and now we have Artemis. Artemis is going to get us back to the moon in a sustainable long-term, for a sustainable and long-term presence on the lunar surface. So what is this Artemis and Apollo? Well, they're twins born to Zeus and Leto in Greek mythology. And if you look, Apollo was the god of the sun and music, which beggars the question, well, why did we call Apollo Apollo? But Artemis is a little bit more related to the moon because she's the god of the hunt and of the moon. And so being Apollo's twin sister, this has been chosen by NASA as the name of the next mission or next program to get humanity to the moon, this time to stay. But let's have a look at Apollo, have a quick look at the Apollo program, because this is something that was unprecedented in human history. Actually sending humans to another planetary surface and returning them safely while conducting an awful lot of science and exploration on an alien world, so to speak. But the Project Apollo name comes from Dr. Abe Silverstone. And again, after he was looking at a book of mythology, he said the image of Apollo riding his chariot across the sun was appropriate to the grand scale of the proposed program. And so Project Apollo was born back in 1960, before we even started to think about sending humans to the lunar surface by the end of that decade. So to give you some background as to why Project Apollo, 4th of October 1957, the Soviet Union basically scared everybody in the world by launching Sputnik, the first ever artificial satellite to go around the moon. And so they had a capability that no one else in the world had. And in 12th of April 1961, they enhanced that capability by putting a human into space and bringing him back safely to the surface of the moon. Although he didn't land as most of you would think of in terms of what happens from station now. he actually had to parachute out of his capsule before it landed because they didn't trust the parachutes and the impact. They thought that would kill the astronaut to begin with. So this guy was had a lot of courage to do that. So more power to him. But then the political situation started to deteriorate. The 17th of April, there was the Bay of Pigs, the CIA-sponsored invasion of Cuba, which precipitated in October of '62 the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there was a lot of there was a lot of other things going on in the late '50s, early '60s. So 25th of May 1961 is when John F. Kennedy gave his famous address to Congress, and I just want you to listen to a little bit of this, because what he said has a lot of relevance about Project Apollo and its ultimate fate.
Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth. I believe we possess all the resources and talents necessary, but the facts of the matter are that we have never made the national decisions or marshaled the national resources required for such leadership. We have never specified long-range goals on an urgent time schedule or managed our resources and our time so as to ensure their fulfillment. I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
So things to note from that speech. This is the President of the United States going to Congress asking for money. Taxpayer-funded program to put humans on the moon and return them safely to this planet. And that became the national goal. So there was a space race going on, and we had to beat the Soviets. So we've already seen that the US was already playing catch up to the Soviet Union. So there's a lot of national pride that was at stake here. And with the other things that were going on with the failed Cuba invasion and deflecting public opinion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, then Project Apollo was something to sort of rally behind and have the nation have a common goal. Now, I point out that for those of you that are interested in more about the background to the moon race, this book by John Longsdon is a political scientist, but has done some really good work in the space, looking into the space race. And it's John F. Kennedy and the Race to the Moon is something that I would recommend highly for people to look a bit deeper into this, and very well written book, and I highly recommend it. So here we have then the moon landings, and of course Apollo 13, the one that almost was a disaster, but turned out we got all the humans back safely. And you can see that the launch and the return dates, they started to get further apart because it became more capable as risk was retired in the systems that were being used. And if you look at this EVA, or extravehicular activity duration, you can see from Apollo 11 through Apollo 17, there was extended times on the lunar surface, again, as the systems were proven very, very capable, and risk was retired. And then with that, and something that I will point out, because samples, you can see that from Apollo 11, about 22 kilograms, and then Apollo 17, 111 kilograms. Some of which haven't been opened yet, and we're actually opening one of those this year with new techniques to look at those samples, and we will actually we actually have what we call new lunar samples because of that. But with Project Apollo, it had no longevity to it because it had a very specific goal, because it had won the space race. So there was no long-term plan. There was a war raging in Vietnam, and that was starting to get expensive, and the public had actually lost interest in sending humans to space. It's sort of similar to the shuttle program. It became, oh, there's another shuttle launch today. Oh, we're going to station. That sounds good. Until there were the disasters, and those are the ones that, after the first several, those are the ones that got the most TV time, so to speak. So there's also politics with Kennedy being a Democrat, and then Nixon, who beat Johnson, being a Republican, and we see that a lot these days, where we go from Republican to Democrat. It seems now, quite ironically, that the moon is a Republican destination rather than a Democratic one. But I would much prefer it to be a bipartisan destination. So politics certainly played into it, such that after Apollo 12, when the US had won the space race, Apollo 20 was cancelled. Then Apollo 18 and 19 were cancelled after Apollo 13, because the thought of losing a crew became very real, and so they wanted to cut their losses, and everything stopped after Apollo 17. So since then, we've been waiting for the return. Talking to Harrison Schmidt from Apollo 17, I know he's wanting to see the 13th human walk on the moon. He is not getting any younger, but again, it's this idea of actually going back there with Apollo being so far off does seem like science fiction again, because the majority of the population really weren't around to see what the remarkable feats that were done by those astronauts that actually did walk on the moon. So it's starting to feel that way again. This is stuff of science fiction, but you have to remember and put it in perspective. Apollo was done with 1950s and 60s technology. Yes, there was a lot of technology development, but without the computing power that we have now, there were 6 successful missions to the moon: 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17. 12 humans walked on the moon and came back, all with that technology. So it really shouldn't, and I use the term there, shouldn't be that difficult to get back there. But there are a number of things that need to fall into place, not least of which is money. And the other one is, of course, politics. So Artemis actually started back in the 1990s as a private venture to put a lunar colony, or create a lunar colony. The Lunar Resources Company founded the Artemis Society in 1994, and the costs for creating this colony were going to be covered by exploiting the entertainment value, i.e. tourism, and sending people to go walk on an alien land. But of course, that never eventuated. So the Artemis program that is now currently in vogue within NASA it actually has its roots on the Space Policy Directive 1 signing on the 11th of December 2017. You can see the President of the United States there signing that into law, with Harrison Schmidt from Apollo 17 standing next to him, because this was the 45th anniversary of Apollo 17, December of 2017. So this is directing NASA to formulate an integrated program with private sector and international partners for a human return to the moon. So if we fast forward to the 13th of May 2019, the NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine revealed the Artemis program and brought that to life as something to start getting capabilities put together under that particular program. Again, in the 26th of March, just before that, there was the 5th National Space Council meeting at Marshall Space Flight Center, and the Vice President directed NASA to land the first woman and the next man on the moon by 2024. This is very similar to Kennedy's speech to Congress about putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade and bringing them back safely. But have a listen to what Mike Pence had to say.
Just as the United States was the first nation to reach the moon in the 20th century, so too will we be the first nation to return astronauts to the moon in the 21st century. And I'm here on the President's behalf to tell the men and women of the Marshall Space Flight Center and the American people that at the direction of the President of the United States, it is the stated policy of this administration and the United States of America to return American astronauts to the moon within the next 5 years. And let me be clear, the first woman and the next man on the moon will both be American astronauts, launched by American rockets from American soil. The President has directed NASA and Administrator Jim Bridenstine to accomplish this goal by any means necessary. In order to succeed, we must focus on the mission over the means. You must consider every available option and platform to meet our goals, including industry, government, and the entire American space enterprise. History is written by those who dare to dream big and do the impossible.
You have given us a charge today, and it is right on time. And I want to say thank you for that vision and the leadership. Our agency, NASA, is going to do everything in its power to meet that vision, to meet that deadline. And you have my full commitment to achieving that. And Mr. Vice President, I can tell you, I am confident we can get to that first launch in 2020 for SLS and actually fly a crew capsule around the moon. We will be using the Gateway as a reusable command module to get boots on the moon as soon as possible. Right. 2008 and 2009, NASA made important discoveries, hundreds of millions of tons of water ice on the poles of the moon. We want to be able to get to that polar region. We need a reusable command module. We need a command module that can, no kidding, maneuver around the moon. That's what the Gateway is all about.
America will once again astonish the world with the heights we reach, the wonders we achieve, and we will lead the world in human space exploration once again. Now let's get to work.
So one thing there, Administrator Bridenstine mentioned, the hundreds of millions of tons of water ice at the lunar poles. He may have embellished that a little bit because we don't know. We know that there's water ice at the poles, but we don't know that there's hundreds of millions of tons. I really, really hope there is, and we will explore that a little bit shortly in this talk here, because those resources, which is what they will be, what they are, and those resources are critical for what it says there in yellow: establish sustainable exploration by 2028. This is quotes from the Artemis program that is on NASA's website there. Again, collaborate with our commercial and international partners and establish sustainable exploration by 2028, and use what we learn on and around the moon to go on to Mars. So Artemis program is a little bigger than Project Apollo because it's using the moon to go to Mars. At least that's one part of it. And then it's actually going to increase the commercial enterprise and allow things to develop really well in terms of job creation, which is something that the moon, we've never thought of the moon in that way before. So again, we look at the Artemis program. There was a rollout of the initial plan from NASA on the 2nd of April, 2020. And again, it comes back that in this initial plan, and these are direct quotes from that plan, It's you know, that building on these footsteps, this is the 2024 mission, future robotic and human explorers will put in place infrastructure for a long-term sustainable presence on the moon. And again, this sustained presence on the moon is something that the United States is going to lead together with commercial partners and international partners. So this is something a little different, because although there were commercial partners involved with the Project Apollo, they were basically contractors. But as we'll see, as we move through this, the idea of commercial partners in the Artemis program is very, very different, and I find incredibly refreshing. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So going to the moon with commercial partners is something that is very different in the Artemis program, because the potential of NASA's budget being used to create jobs. Now, in this time of record unemployment, when we see over 30+ million people unemployed, having an employment prospect becomes even more sacred than it has been in the past. And this is a new sector of the economy that is essentially untapped when we look at commercial activity in and around the moon, or as we call it, cislunar space. As part of that, there's this commercial lunar payload services program that has been started, believe it or not, within the Science Mission Directorate of NASA. And this is where we've got American companies have been tasked to deliver payloads to the lunar surface through a fixed price contract. And these are small and large companies, but it's looking at the capabilities that they have developed. So in the Artemis program, the Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLPS program, is tasked to develop payloads to test technologies for the human landings that follow on with the Artemis. And they can pre-position small payloads that will evolve to larger ones. And the first 2 CLPS landers are scheduled to launch in July of 2021. So just over a year from now. And this is something that we've seen other companies try to do. We had the Space IL from Israel. They litho-braked, as I call it. They crashed into the moon, unfortunately. But this is the first time that that private companies will attempt to land on the moon rather than national space agencies.
The Artemis program is pressing forward to the moon, and science is leading the way. We go to inspire generations and to bring home ideas and discoveries that will benefit all of humanity. To do this, we must better understand the makeup of the moon. We must study areas of the lunar surface where no human or rover has ever been before. Today, we announce an initiative that further demonstrates how this effort is unlike any before it. Today, NASA becomes a customer of commercial partners who will deliver our science instruments and our lunar technology to the surface of the moon. This is a crucial step in our ongoing success. NASA is proud to announce that the first commercial payloads to the lunar surface will be provided by Astrobotic, Intuitive Machines, and Orbit Beyond. These companies are prime examples of American ingenuity, vision, and know-how. Because of these landers and the instruments they deliver, the science, technology, and research that will be done in the immediate future will prepare the way for humanity's return to the moon by 2024. We are going.
So this is, as the administrator said there, these are the CLPS providers. NASA is but one customer on their payloads. It may be the anchor tenant, if you like, but right now, for example, Astrobotic is a company that I know reasonably well, and they have a number of payloads from different, not only different countries, but also from different entities in terms of other companies who want to test their own technology for on the lunar surface. So these are the companies that have been tasked to put these payloads down on the surface of the moon. These would be under 200 kilograms of payload, so these are small landers. But it marks a sea change, if you like, in terms of transportation systems that are now going to take these different payloads to the moon. It's something that is unheard of in terms of the old Apollo model of doing things, where it's all government funded, and then we see what happens when the budgets shrink. But here, for a fixed price contract, these companies have developed their own technology on using their venture, their capital money, in order to get these services up and running. And as I said, 2021 will see the first 2 attempts to actually make this a reality. So this is a major sea change in the way that payloads will be delivered to the moon. So CLPS and Artemis, if you can see here, this is what NASA affectionately refers to as the swoosh diagram, because you can see we've got the Orion, and then we've got Artemis, we've got Gateway coming up here, and then we got Mars off in the distance. But you can see down here we have our CLPS providers putting down payloads, testing technologies that will eventually then feed forward to these rovers. There's the unpressurized rover here, and then we have the habitat that would then allow humans to spend extended time on the lunar surface. If we then expand that out as to what is going to happen beyond 2024, we can see Mars here is getting a little bit bigger. We're getting a bit closer to it. And this Artemis Base Camp becomes the initial base, if you like, on the lunar surface for this sustained presence and sustainable operations for humans on the surface of the moon. So going back then, we can see now that we look back at the rollout on April 2nd this year. This sustainable word keeps coming up. And because the moon, make our return to the moon sustainable, it will allow us then to lead to the first human mission to Mars, because having humans out in space is going to, in order to get to and from Mars, you're talking at least 2 years, a 2-year mission off Earth. So extended human time on the surface of the moon becomes critical, or around the moon becomes critical then for developing technologies to mitigate the space environment and how that adversely affects the human body. But what is the definition of sustainable? If we look at the dictionary, we can see here, able to be maintained at a certain rate or level and able to be upheld or defended. So defending the program to Congress is one thing that will allow the NASA's budget to be maintained at a certain level. So, but how do we make this sustainable? There is no definition of what sustainable is in this document, which was admittedly the first document, the initial rollout document from for the Artemis program. And it's something that is, we need a critical definition in order to direct the United States space program to the moon and then to Mars. So this then becomes critical, and it's something that I've been mulling over in my copious spare time as we've had since the middle of March. So I looked a little deeper, and I spent a bit of time reading through this document, this Artemis rollout document. And there are a number of significant quotes within that show sustainability is already there, but it's sort of hidden in the way that it's been put together. So on page 9, this quote, and I'll read it here, is: "We will develop new technologies that advance our national industries and discover new resources that will help grow our economy." So this tells us sustainability requires the involvement of industry and economic growth. So basically what we set out to do by going to the moon is we want to see a return on the taxpayer investment that was going to be made through the NASA budget. NASA's budget has to be viewed as an investment in the future of this country. And so we need to show Congress and the general public that there is going to be a tangible return. So to start that, this comes to the human lunar lander. This was again announced on the 30th of April, just a couple of weeks ago now. And the following companies were selected to design and build human landing systems. Now, this is Blue Origin, Dynetics, and SpaceX. Now, these companies have put their own capital into developing systems already. And Blue Origin has the New Glenn rocket system, and also the Blue Moon human lunar lander. And Dynetics has been working on a different approach, a single structure of dividing the ascent and descent capabilities, again, launching through the United Launch Alliance. And then SpaceX, we hear a lot about SpaceX and the Starship. And this is the fully integrated human lander and using the SpaceX Super Heavy rocket. So these are three companies that have already spent considerable money in developing systems, and NASA is now using their budget to stimulate job growth in these particular areas. So we're starting to see that return on investment, very different from the way that it was done in Apollo. And if you need a way to, or an example, this is the Space Launch System being developed through Boeing, which is done under the old system. The Space Launch System was supposed to have had its first launch in 2017. Jim Bridenstine said in the video of Mike Pence at the 5th National Space Council meeting that he's confident that the SLS will have its first launch in 2020. That has slipped. And the money is still being spent, but we're 3 years overdue, and we still don't have anything to show for it yet. So that's why you hear the vice president in that same video say, by any means necessary, and it is about the mission, not the means. So he is open to using other launch systems in order to make 2024 a reality. But moving on to the Artemis, within the Artemis rollout plan on page 12, this ISRU is in situ resource utilization, will enable the production of fuel, water, and/or oxygen from local materials, enabling sustainable surface operations with decreasing supply needs from Earth. And this is feeding back into what the administrator said about the water ice at the poles of the moon. So the Artemis Base Camp can be sustainable because it is planned that life support consumables and rocket fuel will be sourced from the moon. And that then allows another opening or a commercial on-ramp for mining companies to get involved with actually seeing if the resources are actually reserves, i.e. they are there in enough quantity and they can be extracted and refined economically. And there are ways to then move forward with actually tempting terrestrial mining companies off planet. But we still have a bit of work to do there, but that's that's another talk. Again, on page 12, we talk about the Artemis Base Camp, or that initial moon base. It might also include a hopper, a transportation system that can go all over the moon, that can deliver science and technology payloads, and could be operated by a crew at Artemis Base Camp and refueled using locally sourced propellant. So again, such local resources could be used to maintain a moon transportation system, as well as refueling the ascent stage of the human lunar lander. So there becomes now a need for propellant. And the most efficient chemical repellent is liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Gives you the highest impulse. There are issues because hydrogen is very small. There are issues with storing hydrogen. But the moon, there's some, especially at the poles, they have some impressively low temperatures that are maintained at the 40 Kelvin range over the course of a year. So I think we have at least the temperature with which to keep hydrogen at well constrained within its tanks. So let's take a quick look then. A little bit of science. We're looking at the resources at the pole, and if we look over here on the left, this is integration of the of 3 data sets These are spectral reflectance data from the M-cubed instrument. There's laser reflectance from the lunar orbiter laser altimeter, and then there's temperature data for Diviner. So for water ice to be stable on the moon, temperature cannot get above about 115 Kelvin throughout the course of the year. And so when you see these little dots at the South Pole and at the North Pole, this is showing ice exposures at the surface that have been seen through the spectral reflectance and the reflectivity data, and they're situated in areas where the annual temperature does not get above that 115 Kelvin threshold. So we've got water ice at the surface. We don't know how far it goes into the subsurface. So let's now look to the diagram on the right. And this is measuring neutrons. And you can see here the low counts of neutrons occur that come out from the lunar interior due to interaction with cosmic rays if there is water ice available, because hydrogen actually absorbs neutrons. So where you have blue or low counts, then you can see that we have a preponderance down to a meter and a half depth of water ice. So, and then what has happened here, and thanks to Shuai Li and Rick Elphick, who worked on this diagram on the right, you can see that the majority of these surface or these high reflectivity data points actually sit within these neutron suppression zones around the lunar poles, showing that not only do we see them at depth, as we see over here on the left, but sorry, on the surface over here with the Shuai Li's work, but over here on the right, those deposits actually extend at least to a meter and a half. So we start to get an idea then of exactly how much water ice might be available in these polar regions, and that then becomes very important if we want to start a water economy, if you like. So what we have over here is something that's really new. Some great work by Kevin Cannon and Dan Britt out of the University of Central Florida. They've taken again the approach of Shuai Li, but they've integrated other data sets to that to give you an ice favorability matrix. And you can see for the North and South poles here, you can see that when you go to the light blue to the white areas, then we're really favorable for that. So we don't know that it's there, but what this does is it tells us where we need to go in order to actually try and find some of these very rich deposits. The other thing that it tells us is that we may not need to venture into some of these craters, as you see here in the South Pole, which are very cold, down to 40 Kelvin. And they also have impressively steep slopes at 30 degrees. And those 30-degree slopes last 4 to 5 kilometers. So getting access to them is also going to be problematic. But this shows that there are other areas, especially in the North Pole, that we could go to in order to explore these resources to see if they are in fact reserves. So given the Artemis Base Camp scenario, I did a few calculations looking at water and oxygen for astronaut life support. And then looking at the number of Earth days, or number in weeks there, but they're actually days, you can see the amount of oxygen in kilograms that would be needed for 1 to 6 astronauts on the lunar surface, and then water to keep the astronauts alive and functioning well. So this is based upon International Space Station data. So the daily needs for a given astronaut are very well known. Given that station has been permanently occupied for about the last 20 years. So the other thing is if we use liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen engines for the space rockets, for the lunar lander, for the hopper, then we've got refueling capabilities that then would push demand up for the water side of it. And of course, you can get oxygen out of that water just by electrolysis. So it's starting to put together a bit of a market strategy in terms of, well, what are the needs? And so if NASA can come up with, well, we'll be willing to pay this much for this amount of water per year over the next 10 years. Is that enough to tempt the commercial companies to actually start going and producing that water? I say more data is needed, especially with regards to understanding if our resources are reserves. But once those data come in, and there is a mission scheduled for NASA, it's a rover mission called Viper, the Volatiles something Polar Explorer. There we go. Can't remember all the acronyms. But that is going to go and actually start prospecting the area as TBD. And it will actually start looking looking at the volatile resources or the water ice resources that and seeing if they are actually economical reserves. So something I don't normally do, but we want to go and extract resources. What are the legal issues? Well, if we go back to 1967, there's the Outer Space Treaty, which states outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty or by means of use or occupation or by any other means. So difficult to exploit. You look at the Moon Agreement in 1979. This provides that the moon and its natural resources are the common heritage of mankind, and that an international regime should be established to govern the exploitation of such resources when such exploitation is about to become feasible. Well, the thing with the Moon Agreement is the United States did not sign it, but they did sign the Outer Space Treaty. And these are the two pieces of legal legislation, if you like, that are often held up as roadblocks to actually looking at resources and starting to extract them on the moon. So in 15th of May, just a couple of days ago, the Artemis Accords were rolled out by NASA, and this comes from another executive order from the White House. And these are principles for a safe, peaceful, and prosperous future. And so if we look at these, they cover a number of things, not in much detail, but they look at international cooperation, they look at transparency, they look at interoperability of systems, so you can have different nations or different companies working together. They can provide emergency assistance to those in need if they're part of the Artemis Accords. Registration of space objects, and again, understanding what the debris is on the lunar surface or what the space debris is around Earth is critical for avoiding disaster. And then Artemis Accord partners will follow NASA's example of releasing their scientific data publicly to ensure that the entire world can benefit from the science and the journey that is about to be undertaken of exploration and discovery. If we then look at the rest of them, protecting historic sites and artifacts, the Ranger, the Surveyor, the Lunar, the Changa, and the Apollo sites on the moon. And then this is the one in yellow. The ability to extract and utilize the resources on the moon, Mars, and asteroids will be critical to support safe and sustainable space exploration and development. Harmful interference, how do we, conflict resolution is talked about. And again, looking at other guidelines that are out there, these would follow those. So we have the Artemis Accords, which is a way to start the conversation about lunar resources that actually starts to get away from the what I call polarizing environment of the Moon Agreement, which says nothing, which says no, you can't use them. You have to remember that both the Outer Space and the Moon Agreements were written in the days when the Cold War was very much on. We are outside of that Cold War era now, and so we need to start talking about how to govern going back to the moon sustainably. That will allow economic growth, and it will allow a permanent human presence on the lunar surface. Because the big thing here is that what makes Artemis sustainable is that we can show with what has been set up so far, Artemis will give a much needed return on taxpayer investment. That will be done through public-private partnerships, and critically, it will be done through use of local resources to reduce the cost of resupply from Earth and stimulate commercial activity. But maybe why the moon is really critical here, and it often gets overlooked, is if we don't make the moon sustainable, Mars, sending humans to Mars, will be a one and done at best. One flags and footprints and then come back, and it won't happen again. Because we won't have learned our lesson from Apollo, and we won't have learned how to make space exploration sustainable. And we need to ensure that that happens. Otherwise, as I say, I don't think we will have a permanent base on the moon, and we certainly won't have humans on Mars, at least in my lifetime. And with that, any questions?
Excellent. Thank you, Clive, very much. So as a reminder, you can submit your questions either through the Zoom Q&A if you're watching in Zoom, or in the YouTube chat, or with the Google form that you can see on both platforms. We've already had some, so I'm just going to launch right in, and we're going to go all the way back to the beginning in the Apollo missions. So, simple question. Why do you still have samples you haven't looked at?
Because some of those samples were chosen to be kept as pristine as we could or unadulterated as we could keep them, because it was realized that new technologies and analytical capabilities would be developed in the ensuing decades since Apollo. So we've now come at a point where we're about to embark on going back to the moon to, if you like, restock the samples. And a lot of the experience and the capability of analyzing some of these samples has actually been lost, because these are core tubes, so they're loose regolith, and there were systems developed back in the 70s to be able to look at these. The people who developed them have long since retired, and so we're now using these to train the next generation of scientists. And what better way to do it, having a new lunar sample? I have a couple of graduate students that are so excited to be involved with this, because this is something they never thought they would be involved with at this stage of their career. But they're the ones that are going to be looking at the Artemis samples that come back.
Excellent. So new technology and advance in that way. So we've already had quite a few questions. So let me try and parse a few of these together. You've talked a lot about, these multiple companies being selected, and they've all invested their own private finance. Mm-hmm. So how much technology is going to be shared between these? If it's for the NASA program and, public money's invested, how much of technology sharing do you think there's going to be then? Or is it going to be kind of kept fairly proprietary to those companies because they invested money?
Again, there's going to be some proprietary technology, I'm sure. But this is why the Artemis Accords become very important, because interoperability is being able, your system that you put on the moon, I need to plug into. So those sorts of things of being able to have that interoperability or that connectivity becomes very important. And another way of looking at it, and it's something that I've been looking into for the robotic mission that I'm leading, there's companies that want to put commercial communication satellites up around the moon. So we've been talking to them about, okay, well, we want to use your service. We need to know, well, what technology are you using? What are the communications? Because we need to build our system to speak to your system, and if you don't tell us what it is, you're not going to have many customers.
So it's almost developing a sort of a standard set of protocols and interfaces between things. Okay,
there you go. And that's by having different companies look at this, you get different approaches, and then by trial and error, if you like, you end up with the one that is the best, or the several that can work together to make everything better.
Okay, great. So coming back a little bit more to some of the launches and things you talked about. Obviously, we're in a pandemic at the moment, and there's a lot of things changing. So the first landers were meant to arrive on the moon, I think, was it July 2021?
Correct.
Is that still on schedule, or is it slipped? Or I guess it may just be a case of there's not been an update on it yet.
Oh, as far as I know, everything's on schedule. I mean, people have been working from home as much as they can, but they're also working on hardware as best they can. That's what I've heard. As I say, I've not heard of anything slipping in terms of when we're going to get there. No announcement out of NASA. And I spoke to the head of CLIPS a couple of days ago, and it's looking rosy, which makes me worried.
But being in instrumentation and science myself, when it's all going right, you kind of wonder what's going wrong that's hidden, that you've missed.
Yeah, so be afraid.
I appreciate that sentiment. So coming back to the kind of the private investment. So obviously there are some fairly high profile figures in private space investment, SpaceX and Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
So how much do you think, aside from the business side of things, how much do you think he has been responsible for perhaps reinvigorating some of that interest in space exploration like there was in, the Apollo program originally?
Well, again, hats off to SpaceX and Elon Musk. Man had a vision. Hats off to Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin. Jeff Bezos has a vision as well. Their vision is reusability in terms of their launch systems. And it is, if you've seen the boosters come back from a SpaceX launch and land back at the launch pad, it's compelling. And this is one of the things with the Space Launch System, that it's all throwaway, and it's $1.5 billion a launch. So yeah, it's a big rocket. It's a big rocket, but if it never gets off this planet, it's not a very good rocket.
Yeah.
So this is why the competition, and now Mike Pence can say, as he said at the Space Council meeting, by any means necessary. So we're not reliant upon SLS, a Space Launch System, to do that. So it's been fantastic to see this revolution, new ideas. That's why Elon Musk was focused very much on Mars. Jeff Bezos has been very much focused on the moon. But the contracts and getting money into these companies now, after they've put their money in, comes from the moon right now.
Gotcha. So thinking a bit about rockets and also the systems to get there, I guess, is everyone basically thinking of just sort of following an Apollo type, trajectory to get there and think there's nothing specifically going to be different? Previously it was sort of the slingshot around the moon and doing all kinds of clever things way before my timeline. But, is anything fundamentally different there? The technology has obviously changed significantly, but are the fundamentals of the missions, the trajectories they take, likely still going to be similar to what they did in Apollo?
Yes, I would say so, except that would be for the 2024 launch. And that's the difference being this gateway creation that they're putting around the moon. So you would actually launch from Earth to go to Gateway. You would dock with Gateway, get out, and then go in the reusable lunar lander to go from Gateway down to the lunar surface. So you'd have a staging post. This is very much like a Mars mission, because it takes you 8 months, 10 months in deep space, in microgravity, and you get there. Your humans are not going to be in tip-top condition. So they need a staging post in order to actually then get down to the lunar surface and hopefully be productive when they get there. So we can learn a lot from the moon. I'm not convinced that Gateway is necessary for the moon. If, for example, the amount of mass that can go to the lunar surface is about half if you go via Gateway, than if you go direct. If we're setting up infrastructure and on the surface, we would have to have cargo landers pre-position a lot. So there are a number of things that need to be worked through. It is very different from Apollo in terms of the gateway. It's very different in terms of Apollo because the plan is to start using the local resources to sustain and maintain human presence there. Longer durations than Apollo are planned right from the beginning. So that is showing that we've learned from Apollo. It's time to move on and evolve from that into something bigger and better. Okay,
great. So a couple of final questions. And it's kind of dealing with perhaps some of the practical aspects of being on the moon. So I'm an astronomer, and I was following for a while a lot of the Chinese rovers that have been on the surface of the moon recently. And obviously the way they tend to work is because of the illumination on the moon, they work for several days at a time and then hibernate because they have solar panels. So you talked a lot about electrolysis and all of this thing that's needed to generate the fuel for everything. I mean, it's not like you have day and then night like you have on Earth. You have these long periods of time, 14 days where it's bright and then 14 days where it's dark.
Not at the poles. Not at the poles.
Exactly. So I was going to say, so does that mean that we'd focus primarily on the poles rather than perhaps somewhere, the mid-latitudes on the moon?
In terms of the thermal regime, then the poles make sense because we now know from the orbital missions that have been up there, even back to Clementine in the 90s, that there are periods in the North Pole that have 80% illumination, maybe even higher than that, and up to 75% in the South Pole. So surviving the night is much less of an issue in terms of going to the poles versus the equatorial regions. The other thing that's developed since Apollo are these kilowatt fission power packs that can be hooked up together. They're going to be very necessary for going to Mars because Mars is further away. So solar energy is less, plus Mars has clouds and dust storms. So you need to have something more reliable than solar. So there's a feed forward aspect to testing those systems on the moon, only 3 days away versus 6 to 8 months away, one way to Mars. So there's a lot of synergies, believe it or not, in what we're going to be doing on the moon for then feeding forward to go into Mars.
Okay, great. So similarly, kind of in thinking about practicalities, the moon is a lot closer. If we, as an astronomer, I was like, it's 1 light second away. So how much could you do robotics-wise that either is, artificial intelligence that manages itself for harvesting, let's say, water, or having someone almost sat on Earth where you have a little bit of lag in control, but it's almost a real-time control you could have with robotics. Would that be something that might be a sort of a sustainable way to do things, at least initially, without, while you're still developing the human aspect back on the surface?
Well, again, there's talk about doing robotic controlled from the Artemis Base Camp. Is doing controlling robots from the gateway. The Soviets did it with 2 rovers back in the 70s from Earth on the near side, Lunar Cod 1, Lunar Cod 2. And they traversed, I think it was it 1 or 2, went 30 odd kilometers. So it's or maybe more than that. But it has been done. It can be done. The issue that you have is the virtual presence. It's like giving this talk in a virtual presence. It's not the same as giving the talk in front of an audience because you can't interact with them, as well as you could when you're face to face. You can't interact with the environment and get the serendipitous science that you get from, say, Apollo. And the seatbelt rock is the one that comes to mind. They were looking for vesicular basalts. They hadn't found any. These are basalts with bubbles in them, holes in them. So it shows that the gas-rich magmas. and they didn't think that there were any, and they were down on time. They were coming back, and they, I think as Dave Scott saw the vesicular rock, the seatbelt rock, and he said, Houston, I have a problem with my seatbelt. They were in the rover, and he said, I have to stop to adjust my seatbelt. So switched off his video camera to do that, and then went out, cataloged the rock, brought it back, and sure enough, that's a beautiful example of the seatbelt rock is on display at Johnson Space Center as a beautiful example of serendipitous science, that you had the human cognitive skills there. When you're doing it via a robot, you miss a lot. You see a lot, but you miss an awful lot.
Yeah, for sure. So one final question. So, you talked a lot about sustainability and what they're trying to do with the Artemis project for that. Is that going to be compatible with the existing international agreements?
I would like to say yes. It is with the Outer Space Agreement. The United States doesn't care about the Moon Agreement because they didn't sign it. They said, no, we're not going to sign this. I talked to a lawyer from Australia, and Australia now has a space agency, and they're interested in the resources. And I just said, well, your country's going to have a bit of an issue because you signed the Moon Agreement. He says, oh, no, it'll be fine. I don't see what the issue is. So I explained it to him, and he said something to me in lawyer speak, which I didn't understand. And so he seems to think that that's not going to be an issue. Well, that's for him to figure out, or for Australia to figure out. What the Artemis Accords, and why I like them, is that it really sets the stage for the conversation. And to me, that's what's been needed for the last 50 odd years, or 41 years if you're doing the Moon Agreement. But that's what's been needed. We need to have a stage set so that the conversation can be had with international partners on the way to move forward.
Excellent. Well, we'll leave it there. And the recording of tonight's talk will be on YouTube later this evening if you want to go back and watch it again. And you can also find the previous Our Universe Revealed talks there as well. We will be back next Tuesday, May the 26th at 7 p.m. And that is with Dr. Keith Davis. He is the director of the Digital Visualization Theatre here at Notre Dame. And he's going to be presenting his talk called Climbing the Distance Ladder. This was the online version of the talk we had to postpone earlier in the semester, so we're still going to squeeze Keith in. And this talk's all going to be about some of the most challenging measurements that we do as astronomers when studying the cosmos, which is figuring out just how far it is to the object you're looking at in the night sky. So hopefully you'll join us next week for that exciting talk. It's going to be the final one before we take a pause with our standard talks during June, give everyone a little bit of a break as the university's just come to the end of its semester. In the meantime, thanks again very much to Clive for his presentation. Thank you all very much for joining us. Stay safe out there and see you back online next week. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.